Okay, I think we'll get started now, Dennis, okay? Thanks very much. Thanks very much to everyone for coming along for this session. Fairly short, snappy sessions. This is the fourth and last in a series we've done between NetApp and Veeam. My name is Mike Walters. I'm one of the solution architects at NetApp. With me is Kevin Ridings. He's gonna do an impressive little whiteboard, or more accurately, a green board thing for most of this session. Please feel free to use chat, the Q&A function with any questions you've got, and we'll try to address them either as we go along or at the end, and there'll be time for questions at the end. So with that, I'm gonna take us through a bit of an introductory to business continuity with StorageGRID working with Veeam. And perception, as it says here, is a powerful thing. When I started at NetApp, we had NFS as a storage protocol, and then we introduced CIFS, so we were file sharing. And then as we worked through the years, we built out a LUN capability, first with virtual LUNs, now using native fiber channel, and iSCSI as well. But as we've moved through even further, we now have the ability to use S3 storage devices, and many customers are looking at cloud solutions. So over time, we've been talking for the last few years about kind of a hybrid multi-cloud experience, where a lot of organizations many years ago would have had on-premise enterprise IT systems. Maybe some of you have got data centers, and maybe will continue to have those. But other organizations or parts of organizations are saying, well, cloud is a good way to, let someone manage the thing a bit for us, but provide us with the capability we want. Others are saying, well, maybe we want a cloud-like experience, but on-premise. So with that, we want to give customers the freedom of choice to build these out as they want, and to have the flexibility to move data around. It might be that you start off by trying something in the cloud, and then it becomes more expensive instead of less expensive, which it should. And so maybe you move things back into on-premise solutions, or maybe another cloud becomes more cost effective and you want to be able to move things around. So NetApp's very much about giving you that ability to move the data where you want it. The other side of the coin is that people need simplicity in what they're managing. IT experts are becoming more generalist in nature just by the virtue of the fact there is so much to manage. And so we want to build a simple experience, make things as easy as possible to work between these different types of solutions. And then finally, of course, and where my focus has been for many years, data protection and making sure you have access to your data regardless of problems that may arise, whether they be human errors, just recover from snapshots, whether they be accidental problems that mean you have to have a disaster kind of recovery, whether they be physical issues or malicious issues. There are lots of challenges organizations are facing, and we want to kind of help people as far as we can. So what we're finding is, for the cloud, object really is the kind of storage of choice. If you look at S3, AWS, or if you look at Azure or Google Cloud Platform, IBM, there's a whole bunch of reasons to move data and use those. And you can see from IDC here that they're anticipating cloud usage is going to grow dramatically more quickly than file-based storage. But keeping up with that growth in the cloud is a challenge. Actually having access to that data and managing it in a cloud ecosystem is not necessarily easy. And S3 is very much a protocol of choice in the cloud. So NetApp, about 10 years ago, purchased a company called Bicast, and it became our StorageGRID appliance. And we're now in our 11th iteration of the kind of underlying software behind it, but it comes in multiple flavors. So it can be a physical appliance. It can run on bare metal, so it can run on Linux, Ubuntu, Debian, and CentOS. And you can merge these things together. It's very much a grid platform, so you can build it out to scale across continents around the globe, as it shows here: New York, London, Sydney. You can build in the protection to suit that, so that no single failure will lose access. And being S3 compliant, it can serve a number of cases. So one very obvious one we're going to talk about and focus on today is using it as a backup repository But at the same time, that same grid could be serving, rich media. Maybe you've got video cameras recording things and you need to store that for access. We can have locked buckets within this cloud. So it really does help build the kind of platform for S3 storage, and it integrates with all the hyperscalers as well, and can scale dramatically. So it can go up to 400 odd petabytes with 100 billion objects within it, and that's a really powerful capability. Now, Veeam and NetApp have had a relationship now for a number of years. And we've been, Kevin and I have known each other for years and worked together on a number of customers. And it's great to be able to try to remove some of the complexity, make the most out of what the secondary storage can offer you and make things simpler to manage so that you can protect the data everywhere, create some value out of that, and have it as simple as possible. So that was really just my very rapid introduction to NetApp and the storage grid capabilities. And Kevin, I'll hand over to you to kind of draw us through some possibilities within the solution we have.
Thanks very much, Mike. Yeah, so what we're going to be talking about today is leveraging that storage grid as a backup repository. And as Mike said, it's very likely that the storage grid is installed in a hybrid use case, not perhaps just for backup retention. But if you do have one deployed in a hybrid approach, it's a great place to extend your backup capacity out to the storage grid, perhaps delivering that geo-redundancy as well that Mike spoke about. So let's get stuck into some of the details here. So if we just start to talk about, of course, we need to protect some workloads, perhaps some physical, some virtual, to start with, and we need to put that data somewhere first. Because the feature that we're talking about today is cloud tier, and that gives us the ability as a secondary location to write out to that storage grid. So we must first protect something. So we're protecting virtual machines or physical with agents, as I mentioned, using Veeam backup and replication. And then perhaps we have a primary stage of backup. Ideal candidate for that would be E-Series. So we would be going potentially from ONTAP or HCI over to E-Series, and then staging out or aging out, probably a more correct term, out to the storage grid. So if we look at to sort of explain some of the features, we need to look at some more detail and look at what does a backup file actually look like, because it's really important because of how we actually move the data around to understand what a backup file actually looks like. The backup file itself contains data and metadata, and we're able to split those, and the full file format is VBK. So let's take a little bit more of a detailed look of what a VBK actually is and what it contains. So within a VBK file, which is our full backup, we're able to split that file up into chunks, and we end up with metadata, real data, more metadata, and as you can see, more data, and of course metadata. We always have 3 copies of the metadata within a particular backup file. When we're moving data to storage grid, what we're able to do is actually dehydrate the file. And I'll go into that in a few moments. But you can see here on the screen, you have metadata blocks and data blocks. When we move the data to storage grid, we're actually, we maintain a shell within the local storage within the E-Series. So just above here, we end up with a dehydrated file. The data blocks have actually moved over to the storage grid. The metadata is kept on-prem in the E-Series, but the metadata, of course, is also copied over to the storage grid. And I'll go into why that's very important in a few moments. But to be able to actually be able to leverage this functionality, the cloud tier, we need to be able to create a scale-out backup repository. Now, a scale-out backup repository is a group of different types of repository. You can see down the left-hand side there, that could be a number of E-Series. storage devices holding primary backups. And on the right-hand side, you would have your storage grid within the scale-out backup repository. Now, if we look at the left-hand side, this is what we would call the performance tier. And over on the right-hand side, which is where the storage grid would be represented, we would call this our capacity tier. Because really what this is about is creating limitless capacity and helping us adhere to our 3-2-1 rule. So 3 copies of your data, 2 different media types, and 1 in a different location. The capacity tier is a great one for 1 in a different location. And of course, that geo redundancy that can be created by connecting multiple storage grids in that grid architecture around the globe. So you can see on the left-hand side, we have those performance tier repositories, excuse me. And then based on policies, once we have backup data in the left-hand side there, we are able to move, maybe looking at something like a 30-day policy. We're able to dehydrate those files as we've just looked at, and then move that data across into the storage grid, creating those backup files and those blocks over in the storage grid, which would mean the metadata and the file data would be over there as well. But if we just go back to the main architecture, and so we've sort of just looked at how the backup files created, how we would dehydrate that. So you can see there on the middle there, that was the E series, we have the VBK before dehydration, and then we have the VBK shell, which just contains the metadata. But we have moved the actual data across into the storage grid itself, along with the metadata. But we have some intelligent processing going on here. Because we maintain the metadata in the E series and the metadata in the storage grid, we're able to be very efficient with the blocks that we move. So on subsequent incremental backups, perhaps, if we're seeing blocks that are the same, they will not be copied up to the storage grid. Because we're able to reference that metadata, that then will make that very efficient. Only copy different blocks over to the storage grid. But that's not just...
Get that. Could you try again?
Excuse me. So that doesn't happen just on for backup, but also for restore. So if you're wanting to perform a restore, there's an intelligent recovery process. So once you've moved that data to the storage grid, you're wanting to recover, maybe you perform instant VM recovery, a file recovery. Because we have that VBK shell maintained on-prem in the E series, that allows us to look where the blocks are, and we would recover from the most logically close blocks. If the blocks that are relevant even to that VBK shell that are held, perhaps they're held within the E series, we would bring back some of in the restore, perform some of the block recovery from the E series. If there are blocks required from the storage grid, we would go there as well, but only for the blocks that are required. That makes it very efficient. Perhaps that storage grid is in a different location, perhaps down what could be considered a suboptimal line. We're still able to perform full recovery type features. By moving that data, copying that data, depending on which function we're using, out to an S3 target like storage grid, we're not limiting the functionality at all. So if we just sort of go through, and I'll detail here the NetApp objects that we're talking about. So we have the ONTAP source storage, could also be HCI. The E series that I keep talking about would be the central location here. And of course, over on the right, we're looking at the storage grid. It's very important, as I just mentioned, excuse me, to understand that when you're moving the data out to the storage grid, you're not limiting any functionality at all. You're just extending the location, extending the capacity of your backup environment, out to what is a very high performance piece of storage. And just to go into a little bit more detail, the block sizes that we have within the backups are defined within the primary backup job. And there can be certain efficiencies made by changing that block size. I'm not going to go into any detail on that today, but if you are interested, take a look on our website for a little bit more detail on that perhaps. So we've looked at looking at the data in the E-series, and that could be, we move that based on maybe a 30-day age. So as that data becomes 30 days old, that backup ages to 30 days, we start to move that across over to the storage grid. Or that's the first iteration of the feature. That would be the aging based at 30 days. We also have a copy feature as well. So if you're trying to adhere to that 3-2-1 rule, so 3 copies, 2 different media types, 1 in a different location, you perhaps want the same retention in the E-series and the storage grid. To be able to do that, you would need to be able to copy them immediately. So that's a possibility as well with the copy feature. So as soon as data exists within the E-series, we are then able to copy it, so and not move it. So the dehydration, that VBK shell that we spoke about for the age, 30-day aging and of data, that wouldn't happen. We would still obviously have the metadata in multiple locations, but you would have the same retention in the E-series as you do have in the storage grid. So it's a great way to be able to leverage that storage grid storage, and as I said, to really extend the capability and the capacity of your backup architecture. Excuse me. So that's a very sort of quick run through of the capacity tier, all available within Veeam Backup and Replication version 10 and previous editions. So please take a look on our website for some additional information. Happy to take questions at this stage. And what I'll do, I'll also open up the mic to Mike to also be able to add some comments and also assist with taking some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. That's pretty good, very clear. I just saw one question from Emmanuel in Q&A. Any release date available for object lock support to use the immutable backup feature in Veeam version 10?
Okay, so we have, obviously you will have seen immutability, and that has been initially was just for Amazon storage. However, we are working very closely with the storage grid team to be able to validate and take advantage of the S3 implementation on storage grid to handle that immutability. I believe it's in testing at the moment, so difficult to give a specific date, but we're probably almost there.
And another one there, which size is needed to be more cost effective than block or file storage? That's a difficult one, because I guess we're really talking about use cases rather than capacities, if I understand the question rightly. You know, most people will want their production data in, you know, either block or file, depending on whether they're dealing with LUNs or indeed file sharing. Sometimes it's flexible. So if you have a database, you know, that could be running on block LUNs, or it could be running on file, maybe NFS. The storage grid really is more about the use case of using object storage, which, you know, as a backup repository is brilliant, because it gives you a really scalable infrastructure. And that's where a lot of customers won't be choosing either or. They'll be building a solution which kind of uses both, I would say. Don't know if you've got anything to add, Kevin.
We do have different data reduction types based on the target. We have that source side deduplication if we're writing to object store. If we're writing to block or file type repository, we have great inbuilt deduplication and compression, obviously leveraging the compression on the NetApp devices also. Yeah. So it's about the use case, and that there isn't really a one answer really to that question.
And I would say, you know, in all cases, get in touch with your local kind of technical team, whether that be from NetApp or from Veeam, and we're quite happy to work together to kind of talk through possibilities. One thing after many years in this industry I've learned is that there's often more than one way to skin a cat. Not that I've skinned any cats.
Absolutely.
Impression there. So, and it's really about, you know, choices and what's best for an individual customer is how I would find it. We've put a few links up on this last slide. There is a technical report that specifically talks about using StorageGRID with Veeam Cloud Tier. So we've put that. There's a couple of other links there and blogs which contain quite a few pieces of information. And I think on that point, I'd say thanks very much to Kevin. You know, we've now done 4 sessions, and hopefully a few of you who have been listening have joined all of them, but if not, they will be available afterwards. I think Dennis will make sure that gets sent out. But I think this format's worked pretty well. It's short and snappy, doesn't take up all day. And in these days, these times, that's kind of important as well. Get back to our day jobs. We'll hang around for any last questions that any of you may have. Otherwise, it's certainly a goodbye from me, and thank you very much. Kevin?
Goodbye from me. Thanks for attending.
Cool.